Hi, I'm Tim Tyler, and today I'll be discussing some of the problems with pornography, fantasy and games. Human beings are not living in the environment they evolved in, and as a result of this they engage in a variety of irrational behaviours which fail to promote their own goals. The modern environment contains pleasurable drugs which provide the brain with a reward signal without it actually doing anything useful. It contains sweets, cakes, ice cream and other foodstuffs rich in dietary energy but low in desirable nutrients. This video is concerned with some other relatively new phenomena that cause humans to act in an irrational manner. The entertainment industry spends billions of dollars a year on films, games, pornography and escapism. These funds do typically not produce anything worthwhile. They don't feed anybody. No housing or shelter is provided. The world doesn't wind up better irrigated as a result. No more useful elements or minerals come into circulation. Scientific knowledge is not advanced, nor is very much technical progress made. It is not just the funds that are wasted. Precious natural resources are needlessly depleted as well. Human time and effort which could usefully be spent in other areas are also used up. Both the consumers and the producers are adversely affected. What is produced as a result of all this expenditure is entertainment. What is entertainment? It's a type of stimulation designed to trigger a drug-like state of euphoria. Upon receipt of certain kinds of sensory input, the human brain produces drug-like compounds associated with positive behavioural reinforcement. Various types of entertainment cause different types of stimulation. Comedy activates the nucleus accumbens, a brain area which is known to be involved in the rewarding feelings that follow monetary gain or the use of some addictive drugs. The shock relief cycle that horror movies repeatedly put the viewer through works as another type of drug-based conditioning, this time based on endorphins. Action-adventure games are fueled by adrenaline. Pornography works on the brain's sexual reward centres, and so on. The result of all this drug-related stimulation is a high level of fantasy addiction in the population. Addicts tend to become couch potatoes, often with various other associated pathologies, eye strain, back problems, malnutrition, and so on. Some exposure to storytelling and fantasies may be beneficial, since it allows humans to gain exposure to the experiences of others quickly and in relative safety. This probably explains why humans are attracted to this sort of thing in the first place. Unfortunately, the levels of stimulation available today tend to go beyond what is healthy and beneficial. They typically represent a superstimulus, in order to encourage a rapid response and subsequent addiction. In the ancestral environment, a taste for images of naked bodies of members of the opposite sex was probably adaptive. However, in modern times there is a whole industry devoted to pumping people as full of such images as they can manage, and people have a considerable appetite for this kind of thing, because such images would have been historically associated with the making of babies. Similarly, in the ancestral environment, a taste for concentrated sources of dietary energy was probably adaptive too. However, these days there are fast food chains devoted to encouraging people to buy this type of junk food, and the more they buy the better. Drugs are another similar problem. Large corporations peddle addictive drugs like nicotine to susceptible members of the population, and they use some of the money they earn to lobby the government to allow them to continue with such activities. The government doesn't seem to mind too much, since this is a good source of immediate tax dollars for them, and the costs appear too far down the line for the government to care very much. As time passes, technological progress means that these phenomena will become increasingly effective. Drugs will get better, food will taste better, movies will be more engaging, music will sound better, pornography will become more stimulating, and computer games will become more realistic. What's wrong with a little entertainment? Potentially quite a bit. Directly fingering your own pleasure centre is often a rapid route to disaster. If humanity gets into doing that, it could effectively become a kind of wirehead, an agent so interested in its own pleasure that it becomes incapable of constructive action. Here is Steve Omohundro on the problem.
Now, if you have an irrationality, if you have one of these sort of situations where you're going to give up your resources with no benefit to yourself, and there's some other species which discovers that, why then it's in their interest to exploit that vulnerability. And so there are natural pressures in the biological world for creatures whose preferences about the world are not rational to be exploited by others and get rid of those irrationalities. And that's part of the general progression toward more economically rational behavior. And if you look at today's society, humans are not rational. We've got all kinds of, in fact, there's whole areas of economics called behavioral economics and psychology, which are exploring all the ways in which humans are irrational. And things like addictions is a really tragic example of something where, you know, we think a certain experience is going to bring us lasting happiness, like sitting in the corner smoking crack, whereas in fact we just, you know, give all our money to the crack dealer and we don't end up sort of fulfilling our human destiny. And the real tragedy is that our economic system, because you're willing to give up money for those things, the economic system will hone right in on the vulnerabilities. And so you can look at the, you know, alcohol industry, the drug industry, the pornography industry. All of these are sort of homing in on human vulnerabilities. And over the longer term, people who are exploitable in that way will eventually, you know, not leave so many offspring, and eventually get rid of those.
The scale of this problem is enormous. Billions of dollars are wasted each year while bringing little or no benefit to either individual consumers or the state. The young are among the most vulnerable. What can be done? The resolution that Steve mentioned, that of letting the evolutionary process take its course, seems likely to work rather slowly. Fortunately, there are some other options to consider. Looking at the case of drugs, society uses several techniques to limit their abuse. Education is used in order to make people aware of the problem. Legal constraints, regulation and taxation are used to make access to drugs harder. Also, therapeutic interventions are employed for those whose lives have suffered from becoming addicts. Another perspective on the issue comes from examining copyright law. The copyright laws were created in order to offer artificial protection to informational entities which would otherwise be too fragile to survive in a free market. Since the copyright laws are the proximate cause of the problem, one obvious solution is to strike these from the books. That would have the effect of cutting off the air supply to the entertainment pushers. Useful arts that are genuinely beneficial to the population would not be adversely affected by this, since anything which is genuinely useful to the population would then receive government sponsorship instead. What would suffer are things like video games, pornography, violence and horror, the material widely regarded as being the least desirable and therefore the least likely to attract Arts Council funding. In fact, even abolishing the copyright laws would probably not be enough. The prevalence of the wannabe pop star syndrome, where individuals are naturally attracted to jobs involving exhibiting themselves on a stage surrounded by adoring fans, means that humans are likely to spend too much energy producing entertainment, even if there were no copyright laws to help finance it with artificially created monopolies. Additional deterrents, such as entertainment taxes, might be needed to redress this tendency. Unfortunately, abolishing the copyright laws would not get to the root of the problem. The vast throngs of fantasy addicts represent a large proportion of the population, and they would simply vote in new politicians, get the copyright laws re-established again, and then continue to writhe in their entertainment-induced ecstasies, blissfully uncaring about the billions of dollars that their actions are collectively wasting. One thing that might help is peer-to-peer networking technology. Encryption will ultimately mean that regulatory authorities will have to establish surveillance that extends into everyone's homes if they want to effectively regulate the distribution of copyrighted material on the internet. Such ubiquitous surveillance may ultimately become commonplace on security grounds, but until it does, it seems likely that copyright violations will increase in frequency, perhaps to the point where copyright law is weakened so it is not treated with such contempt. In my estimation, the scale of this problem is enormous. To give one example, audiences paid over $900 million to watch Spider-Man 3 recently. That's almost $1 billion wasted on that one movie. At this stage in our development, humans need to concentrate on establishing colonies on other planets and on technological development in order to be able to avoid problems during our development, and avoid being assimilated by the first aliens we encounter. In the short term, that involves feeding and sheltering each other, medical, technological and scientific progress, irrigation projects and other worthy endeavours. Vast expenditures of resources on pornography, games and escapist fantasies is just not a high priority. Indeed, it represents a management disaster that may contribute to our premature demise as a species. In my view, humanity needs to recognise this issue as a problem that needs fixing and work on fixing it. Enjoy.